Thanks for joining us today on the Big Blue Podcast. I'm Greg Stone, Metro Campus Provost, as always here with Dr. Leigh Goodson, President of Tulsa Community College. Hello, Dr. Goodson.
How you doing, Dr. Stone?
I am great. And also with us again is Patrick Green, who's Interim Vice President for... See, now I've even started calling you Patrick. It's catching up.
His mother is going to be
Green.
so happy. Yeah.
Pat Green, who's our Interim Vice President for Workforce Development. And this is the second of a two-part interview about the importance of workforce development and some of the trends that Pat is seeing in his work as interim VP. I want to ask you, Pat, just to start off with, in the last interview, for people who maybe haven't listened to it yet, we were talking about the industries from which new jobs in the state would emerge in the next decade, healthcare being the lion's share, as you said. How do you think TCC is poised to meet the demands of not only the local but also the state workforce during the next decade as we're trying to bridge that skills gap?
I think we're really well positioned to do our part to help close the skills gap. We're lucky at TCC to have faculty that we do that stay engaged in their disciplines. Many of these jobs are not in industries where it's a brand new sort of creation. It's sort of offshoots of computer science, offshoots of manufacturing. And we're lucky to have faculty that keep up. We also, the college keeps its ear to the ground really well. We have advisory committees that inform all of our programs about trends, new skills that are needed, any new programs we might want to launch, things like that.
And as we were talking in the last interview, the work of community colleges in bridging that skills gap is so key because we are able to be more nimble and responsive than a four-year university would be. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you use a variety of tools to determine what we need to be doing next. And those tools are data, different data sources.
Right.
Analyzed in different ways. So talk to us a little bit about labor market data and how we use that and what we do with it in closing the skills gap.
Sure. I think the pieces of labor market data I tend to be most interested in from a higher education perspective are the attainment level first and foremost versus the skills needed in the local economy. I think another tool that we use quite often and that we use with our programs is to look at individual job postings in the region. And while that may not give us a perfectly clear example of how many jobs there are, it definitely lets us know the demand. When we see companies in an industry searching very, very hard for people with associate degrees, we know that we need to be producing more associate degrees. I think last year in Tulsa, using one of our tools, in our service area, there were over 12,000 jobs posted requiring only an associate's degree. And the average employer in Tulsa looking for someone with an associate's degree has to post that job 7 different ways to find that person.
Wow. That's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work.
Yeah.
And I assume that there aren't people in your office who are just sitting with the daily newspaper with the want ads counting, right? I mean, like there's a lot of sophisticated tools and software that we're tapping into locally and statewide to help get us that information, right?
Absolutely. We use everything from Bureau of Labor Statistics, Department of Labor data. We also engage EMSI, an economic modeling company that can do some work with us and has given us an analyst tool to let us look really laser focused at county and even zip code data.
Wow. So given the data that you've seen so far in the time that you've been in this role, what new programs do we need to think about as a college, beginning, like you said, offshoots of maybe existing areas? What are some of those opportunities for growth for us?
I think to focus first on healthcare, I think we do have some opportunities there. There are emerging occupations in healthcare that are important to follow, that sometimes require an associate's degree to work, and are increasingly, as healthcare, the degreification of jobs in healthcare increases. There'll be more and more need. I also think logistics is one of the power sectors in Tulsa. It's an area where TCC has not had a program in quite some time. We will, beginning in the fall at West Campus, have a non-credit certificate, but it's an area that we definitely need to focus on. I think other areas that we need to put more of an emphasis on to respond to the needs of the changing economy are short-term certifications, short-term trainings in areas like computer science, maybe even some programs focused around data analysis. As firms across the country, not just in Tulsa, have collected mountains and mountains of data over the years, and they're just now figuring out how to use that data to their advantage. There will be associate level jobs in those industries as they grow. It's something we may not need a program right now, but it's something we need to be thinking about.
Pat Green, Interim Vice President of Workforce Development, is our guest today on the Big Blue Podcast, and we're discussing TCC's work in helping close the skills gap. It's pretty interesting. In the first segment of this two-part series, we talked about sort of the big picture, and now we're talking specifically about what TCC is doing to help close the skills gap. So you've done a lot of work. We've already talked about how you study data all the time, and that's a huge part of the role that you play in helping us make sure we're going in the direction that we need to go to support the area economy. How are TCC graduates performing out there? What do our employers say about it? And is there data that points to the performance of our graduates so that we as educators understand if we're doing a great job or not?
Right. The employer feedback we get on TCC students is great. We produce the kind of students that industry wants to hire. That's a real testament to our faculty and to the way they impart skills, that those skills stick. And that isn't just anecdotal, that's also borne out by the data. The best data that we can get from the state regents would say that of our AAS programs, which are designed for people to go directly to work when they leave us, those students are employed at a clip of 90% within a year, which is competitive, if not better than any four-year university you're going to find. And 5 years out, they have a median salary of over $40,000, $43,000 to be more precise, but which again is going to be on par with what you'll see at a four-year university.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's really about more of the same is what they want, is what they need.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
Exactly.
right.
Yeah.
Which lends itself well to the work we're doing with Pathways and the pillars of the Aspen Prize.
Exactly.
To and through labor market outcomes.
That's it. We don't hear change what you're doing. We hear double your program size, triple your program size,
That's
send us more
absolutely
people.
Right.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right. When I'm visiting with my corporate counterparts, it's more.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, we've talked a lot about workforce, but I can't help but ask about gen ed and maybe sort of teeing up a question. Because I think historically there has been a bit of a divide, not just at TCC, but in higher ed in general, about there's the workforce side, and you all do what you do, and those of us on the gen ed transfer side, we do what we do, and sort of never the twain shall meet, right?
Right.
But those areas are very interwoven, or should be, in terms of what students get out of both of those experiences. So, I mean, what would you say to a gen ed or university transfer faculty member about the role that they play in helping in this work in trying to bridge that skills gap?
What I would tell, if somebody was concerned, a gen ed faculty, what I would tell them is they almost can't overestimate the value of a good general education along with the technical education. Mm-hmm. What separates us from a lot of places is the fact that we don't train people to push buttons all day, right? We're higher education. It is a part of what we do is impart general education goals and institutional learning outcomes. A lot of the students that are in K-12 right now that will be coming to us in the future, they're going to study for jobs that we don't even know what they are. They don't exist. Mm-hmm. I think it was the Secretary of Education under Clinton has the famous quote, "We're preparing students for jobs that do not exist yet to solve problems that we don't even know are problems." Mm-hmm. And students who have a good general education component are the students who will succeed in that kind of situation. They'll be more adaptable. They'll be able to critically think. Technical education alone is not gonna make it in a lot of these work environments. So I would say everybody's a workforce faculty, as well as everyone's a gen ed faculty.
Right.
I think our workforce faculty ought to be thinking of themselves as imparting critical thinking. They ought to be thinking about social and personal responsibility and communication skills, just as our gen ed faculty ought to be thinking about the way those skills they're imparting are effective in the workplace.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
impact the workplace.
Absolutely.
Well, we've talked a little bit about what TC is doing right. When we go out and talk to our corporate partners, they just want more. So is there anything else in our efforts that we could be doing that we're not? What's the horizon for TCC in terms of workforce development?
You know, what I see in the horizon, and it's not necessarily just a TCC thing, what I see in the horizon across community colleges is the need to engage with the adult population. I think when we look at just the sheer numbers and from a social perspective as well, that's a tough order. That's a tall order to do. I think when you consider the ability of people to move up and down socioeconomically in America right now, coupled with education prices and things, you could argue that engaging the adult population, the work we do here, is the hardest work that anyone's doing related to social mobility. But I think that's where community colleges are headed. That's what I see on the horizon, is greater engagement with adults and greater engagement with more diverse populations.
Makes sense.
Yep, absolutely. Pat, as we wrap things up, we're going to ask you the question that we ask all of our guests, which is, if you could go back in time and give some advice to your 18-year-old college-going self, what would that advice be?
That's a good question. There's a lot of things I would tell myself when I was 18. I think when I was 18, the thing I would tell myself as I went into college is that the joy of the whole thing, the joy of life is in the journey, is the quote. But I would say that the joy of the whole thing is in the process. The greatest regret I have from college is that I graduated early.
Interesting.
I didn't necessarily stop and smell the roses the entire way through and realize everything I was learning and how valuable that might be.
Did you go straight to law school after you graduated?
I did. I graduated early and went straight to law school as a 21-year-old. Probably would have done that a little bit differently in the past. That's not to say you shouldn't finish on time, but it is to say enjoy that learning process and make the most of it, because it's easy in higher ed to get caught up in sort of an abstract idea of achievement, but really those learning processes are what will pay off for you in the future. They're what will pay off for this college. I think even from the college perspective, that's a great idea to think about as well, because this can sound like we're churning out widgets when we talk about 600,000 people and all these data and numbers.
Absolutely.
But on the other side, you have to balance that the general education outcomes are what keep people at jobs. They may not be what gets them there. It may be the technical education, but you have to balance that more thoughtful aspect with the time crunch and this imperative.
The critical thinking, the analysis, the ability to think outside the box.
Absolutely.
Right.
Important. Well, thank you. You've been listening to the Big Blue Podcast. We want to thank our guest, Patrick Green, for spending some time with us today. And we want to thank you for listening. Remember, you can catch the Big Blue Podcast each week in the week at TCC and on the Creativity channel at YouTube. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Pat.
See you next time.